Hello, hello, and welcome again to Surel's Place. Another artist event. Yay! We're here again, and this is a hybrid event which we've just started doing. I think this is maybe our second hybrid event, so you do see a few people here in the room, and we are very happy for those of you that are also joining us live on Facebook from wherever you are. I'm Jody Eichelberger, the program director here at Surel's Place. And I just want to tell you about a couple of things that are coming up. Next up is our closing event for the Bosco Small Works show. And you'll see some of that artwork here in the background behind Fran as she is reading. If you want to see it in person, maybe purchase something and take it home with you. Your next opportunity to do that is on Saturday the 18th. And Elizabeth and Diane, welcome. They're all part of the everyone's part of the show tonight. Hi. Looks like we've got just the right number of chairs set up. That's excellent. We also have some opportunities for you to see the Green Box installation by Ted Appel. That will be open during the Christmas market that's here at 34th Street Market between 10 and noon on a couple of Saturdays, and we'll be closing on the same night as the Bosco Small Works show. And it is fun to see it at night. Fun is maybe not the word most people would use, but it is an experience anyway. We are excited to have this reading here tonight. I'm not actually going to be introducing the artist. I'm going to turn the microphone over to her host. So if you don't know, this is an opportunity for you to be involved with Surel's Place as well. You can be a volunteer host. That doesn't mean that the artist is living with you. It just means that you are their cultural connection to Boise and to the community, also helping with things like groceries and finding out where to go when you run out of hair bands or whatever it is that you need. And the host for Fran has been one of our own board members and also a previous host, Julie Chigbrow.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jody. Hi, everyone. I am Julie Chigbrow. As Jody introduced me, I am a board member here at Surel's Place. I had the pleasure of being Fran's host, and it was fantastic to host her the month that she's been here in Garden City. Fran is a fiction writer. For those of you who don't know, she comes here from New York City via Chicago. She has an MFA in fiction from Rutgers University, where she's also continuing to teach creative writing there. She has what I believe is a fascinating background in both stand-up comedy and writing for publications like The Onion. So she's got some stories definitely to share. And tonight for her reading, she's going to be reading from two different pieces of work. First up is Boy Teachers, which is a project she's been working on, I believe, for about 3 years now. So she'll be doing a couple lines from that. And then she's also going to be reading from her newest project, Greta, which is also very interesting. And she just kind of started that process here with her residency, starting that research and that writing. And she'll get into that a little bit, but it has a lot to do with kind of family drama and kind of getting into what could have happened based off of a story that she just found out about with her family. And I'll let her give those details because she could do it much better than me. So with that, let's welcome Fran.
Thank you, Julie. And I'm very skeptical of acknowledgments and thanks that go long, because then they become about the person saying them than the people who are being thanked. But I just want to say thank you to Jody and Julie and Greg and Marnie and all the Surel's Place folks for making me feel very welcomed and at home here. It's been really great. I've gotten a lot of work done, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity. So as Julie said, I'm going to start with a bit from Boy Teachers, which is a satirical novel I've been working on for about 3 years now about two male teachers at a public high school who get embroiled in a bit of a faculty scandal, both with each other and around students, and the way in which that affects not only the way people view them within the school, but how they view each other. I'm just going to read this from it. It's not the beginning of the novel, but it's very close to the beginning. And the inciting incident between them is that Tommy, who's a new teacher at the school, spots texting during faculty orientation, pulls him aside after the faculty orientation to kind of give him some shit about it, which Seth takes a lot of offense at, having a new teacher tell him how to do his job, and it sends him on one of his many spirals. So this takes place a few weeks after that. There was information about Tommy Kelly that Seth wanted but did not have access to. What did he teach? What periods did he teach? Where could he be found during the off hours of the school day, that dread-inducing 7 o'clock wait for the students to show up, or the exhausted 3 o'clock breath of relief when they went home? Seth kept hoping that if he roamed the hallways with enough aimlessness, he could stumble into him, as easy as walking into a wardrobe and winding up in another world. It never happened like that. One of the most irritable parts of aging was the realization you could not simply will a situation into being. Only at the welcome back assembly at the end of the first week of school did he finally see Tommy across the field house. Fridays were casual, and so was Tommy. He was wearing a gray Prairie Grove North t-shirt tucked into a pair of jeans. From across the room, he looked so young. Had Seth not met him at the faculty orientation, he would have believed that Tommy was a student, maybe, though he never liked when the teachers did that to him. He'd once worried the students thought that about him during his first school year teaching, but pleasurable as teaching was, it had taken its toll on Seth's appearance over the past 5 years. He grew small bags under his eyes, and he could feel his hair thinning at the top of his forehead. Perhaps he also might have mistaken Tommy for a student during the assembly, because throughout, a grave and stoic conversation about the perils of underage drinking, and by extension, drunk driving, brutally milking the death of a student from years before Seth himself had attended Prairie Grove North, Tommy was whispering and muttering to the students sitting around him, stifling laughter and what Seth assumed to be needless asides. This was the same person who got on him about texting during orientation. He'd have liked to see Tommy laughing if any of his students got caught drinking and driving. No, he didn't wish that. It was a cruel thought, one Seth tried to bury as quickly as it entered his brain. He glanced over to his third period class seated all around him. They were quiet, disinterested. None of them leaned over to mutter anything snarky to him, nor did Seth do the same to them. The lecture was melodramatic, and perhaps also tasteless. He could have said that to the girl next to him, a chubby, freckled girl named Rose. Seth cleared his throat and said, but his voice caught and he choked on nothing for a few seconds. Rose turned to him, eyes wide. Are you okay, Mr. Gold? He coughed twice. Students from his and others' classes looked at him. Even Helen poked her head out from the masses. Seth nodded. I'm fine, he whispered. He pointed with the hand not covering his mouth towards the speaker. You should be paying attention. Through tears, he swallowed whatever bit of dust or errant bit of lunch was stuck in his throat. Across the field house, Tommy Kelly stopped talking to his students and listened to the speaker, patiently, hands folded in his lap, as if nothing happened, though it had. Okay. So that's just a little bit of Boy Teachers. It's a really chatty novel, and sometimes not always easy to perform the voices all as one person when they all sound a little bit like you. So I'm going to read a longer excerpt with some dialogue, no voices, from this Greta project I'm working on, which is a working title. This is a project rooted a bit in my family history. About 5 years ago, the Jewish Museum in New York got in contact with my mother, who is hopefully watching, about a bracelet that was donated to the museum by my great-great-grandmother that she had made during the Holocaust at Dresden, the concentration camp. And we hadn't known about this artifact, and research into family history and genealogy had been a passion of my mother's for some time, but this kind of unlocked a more visual aspect of that. And for me personally, going to the Jewish Museum and seeing this bracelet and sort of understanding that there were parts of my family that we just did not have access to and don't have access to, and sent me spiraling in the best possible creative way. And I think one of the reasons we just don't know that much about Greta and Martha and other great aunt is that they and Greta were not especially close. Was there like a specific falling out, some kind of incident? And I just started thinking around this time in Jewish life in New York City, which is to say, in the late 1950s, early 1960s, and what life for Jewish women was like at that point of time. It was an interesting point in assimilation, In a lot of ways, it was the time in which Jewish people in America became white, in a sense, and were no longer considered this ethnic minority. It became easier to pass as non-Jewish. And I think this generational divide between my grandmother and her aunts probably reached a boiling point at some point during this time in America, which was also very tumultuous. So I've taken all those thoughts and I've funneled it into a work that is purely fiction, borrowing a little bit of names from reality, but subject to change. It just helps me keep them clear in my own head to imagine them as I've seen pictures. So this is going to be a little bit of the beginning of this project. I've been writing it in sort of fits and spurts from all over the place in the narrative, but this will be, page 1. It was the biggest mistake of Hetty's life to come back to New York. The realization did not come immediately, like the rush of steam that smacked her in the face as she got off the train. It would come later, as she walked through Jackson Heights, her tights snagging on the edge of her shoe. She had a blister bulging on the back of her ankle. She hadn't had the blister in Chicago, in Evanston. This was a New York acquisition. By the time she reached Greta and Martha's apartment, it would be oozing. They would get the plaster wrap down from the medicine cabinet and say something like, "These were the best shoes you have?" And that's when she would know she should have never come back to New York. Oh, did I lose a page in here? Oh, hang on. Apologies. I seem to have printed only odd pages after a point. Hang on. Okay, here we go. Oh, it changed paper. I'm on the thin parchmenty paper. That's good for like a historical piece. Yeah. It had felt so good to leave all those years ago. Goodbye heat, goodbye trash, goodbye to Queens and her parents' awful little apartment. In Evanston, the air was crisp and clean. The water from Lake Michigan did not smell of anything, let alone the odorous, briny salt of the Atlantic. Hetty hated the Atlantic too, maybe more than New York. She had no desire to be out at the beach. It did not represent freedom or independence to her. Rather, to stand on the shore of its waters was the indignant reminder that she had come from somewhere she could not see and did not remember. "I won't come back," Hetty had warned at the time. "Goodbye forever." They were having coffee at Martha and Greta's. They were always having coffee at Martha and Greta's. Not Hetty, not by choice, but her parents. And when she didn't have anywhere to be, which at the age of 20 she rarely did, they dragged her a few blocks over to sit with them for coffee. No one asked her anything usually. She sat, she listened, she looked out the windows. Sometimes Greta would ask about school. Not about it, but if she was still in it. Still in school? Hetty would nod. Greta would nod. She hadn't finished school. There was nothing else for her to say about it. At least it was good coffee. Strong, aromatic. None of the corner store drip like they had by the college. How any of that filth was supposed to keep a student awake was beyond her. When Greta and Martha arrived in the States after everything, they agreed they wouldn't go a day in their lives without a good cup of coffee ever again. They had all sat around. Hetty, her parents, Greta, Greta's new boyfriend or fiance, whatever he was, Hans was his name, and Martha. Everyone kept their mouth shut about Hans. Not that there was that much to say about him. He was very dull and uninteresting. Why he was around all the time, Hetty had no idea. They sat in a circle. They were always sitting in circles, equal face time for everyone in the room. Her parents were seated on the couch next to the window, Greta and Hans on the love seat next to the bookcase. Martha hovered. Martha loved to hover, but when she sat, she was in one of the dining room chairs pulled into the circle, and Hetty got the stiff old armchair, the hot seat. "You couldn't become a doctor in New York?" Greta asked, sliding her a plate full of sandwiches. "Morris has a lot of contacts in Chicago," she said. "He thinks he can do a lot of business there." "He thinks he can do a lot of business there," Martha said. "Did you hear?" "He thinks," Greta repeated. They were always like this, the aunts, passive-aggressive, doubtful. To any outsider, Greta and Martha looked like sisters, carried themselves like sisters. They took their walks together, they shopped together. On occasion, Hetty remembered them walking up to her parents' apartment arm in arm. Greta was the younger one, caramel-colored hair with a few streaks of gray, usually pulled back into a neat low bun, and a real Coca-Cola bottle body. She was a catch, once, now, future. Greta wore knit dresses belted at the waist in rich shades of purple and green. She was never without a pair of earrings. Though Hans could dress like a schlub all he wanted, and he did, Greta wanted the world to know what a catch she was. Martha, on the other hand, the older aunt, dressed the part of an old matron, a spinster, though she was only a year and a half older than Greta. Her hair had grayed completely, long before she turned 40, Hetty's mother told her, long before she came to New York. She was rounder than Greta, not fat, but not thin either, and not curvaceous, but stout and solid. Martha is hearty like a stew, Hetty heard Greta say once when she was a little girl, and then it was impossible to see her as anything but a soup of a woman. Martha wore glasses too, cheap plasticky cat-eye frames. Someone must have told her they were trendy. They looked like sisters, but they were not sisters, not by blood. Greta was Hetty's father's sister, Martha her mother's sister. They'd met at her parents' wedding, and they'd been inseparable ever since. What is Morris's industry again? Martha asked, placing 3 sugar cubes into her coffee. It's textiles, Greta said. It's not textiles, Hetty said. It's not textiles, Hetty's mother said. What is it then? It's dinnerware, Hetty's mother specified. Kitchenware, Hetty specified. It doesn't have to be exclusive to dinner. Greta said. I know, Martha said. They had this unspoken little language between them. Not even Hetty's parents could translate it. What? Hetty asked. Kitchenware. What about it? A bit feminine, don't you think? Greta said. For a man to do, I mean. Did anyone in her family like Morris? If they did, they weren't eager to make themselves heard. Hetty and Morris had grown up together, lived on the same block, played on the same streets. He told her in high school he would marry her, and he did. To meet someone as a child and fall in love with them was not to sit someone down and say, so what will your career be? How many children do you want to have? He was certain about Hetty, so what else could she give him but her certainty in return? And Morris wasn't wrong about where he had contacts, how he could make money. The consumer industries of Chicago were booming. He went to dinners and meetings, conferences and conventions. He shook hands. He played nice. Morris was social and sweet. He did plenty of business in Chicago, and then he met another woman. Greta was telling a story when Hetty came in. No one said welcome. No one said put your bags down, take a seat on the couch. The door was unlocked, and she let herself in unannounced. Greta and Martha never locked the door. What horrible thing could happen to them that hadn't happened already? That was the logic. If someone wanted to kill them, good, let them try. Greta was telling a story, so the instruction was to listen, even as Hetty tried in vain to move through the apartment with grace. It wasn't that he was romantic, it's that he was a romantic. There's a difference, of course, though not many women know this. They see one bouquet of roses and they go, oh, he's such a romantic. He is not. A purchase does not a romantic make. It's in the posture, you see, the way they carry themselves. Shoulders, hips. It's very masculine, to be a romantic, to enjoy romance. They don't tell you this. Women don't talk about this, Greta was explaining to the women in the room. Hetty knew Martha, of course, standing in the kitchen, minding the teapot, and one other woman they were friends with named Miriam, who'd been present at every major event of her childhood, without Hetty understanding fully who she was. 2 other women sat in the living room, both in their 50s or late 40s, maybe, neither of whom were known to Hetty. She didn't know who Greta was talking about either. Hans was out of the picture for who knows how long now. Hetty's mother had told her when it happened, Hans is out of the picture. What will Greta do now? Oh, what she always does, her mother said with a sigh, find another man with too many hours in the day. Whoever Greta's romantic in question was, Hetty didn't doubt she'd find out soon. She slid down the hall, dragging her suitcase behind her. The blister on her heel had reached its terminal state, bleeding over the side of her shoe. Luckily, Martha caught her eye and nodded to Miriam to watch the teapot. At last, she said, pulling Hetty into a hug and planting a wet kiss on her cheek. Hetty touched the spot, smearing the spit off to the side. Nice to see you. Martha led her down the hallway to their spare bedroom. There's a Goyish doctor at work you should meet, she whispered. Can you help me with my suitcase? Hetty asked. There is a lot of talking coming from the kitchen, Greta said loudly. Martha put a finger up to her lips and took Hetty's suitcase. She shook out the cramp in her arm as she followed Martha to the spare bedroom. Did you hear me? Martha asked, her voice growing louder once they were out of earshot of the living room. What? There was a Goyish doctor at work. Hetty's divorce papers weren't finalized yet, and Martha was already trying to set her up. And with a Gentile at that? She set Hetty's bag down with a whoomph and walked out of the room without another word. They must have really given up on her. Hetty sat in the spare bedroom, kicking off her shoes on the floor. She pressed her palm against the blister, which pulsated warmth against her skin. That was a problem for later. She didn't intend to leave the apartment for a few days, maybe the whole summer if she could manage it. The women out in the living room all laughed in unison. Greta had told a joke, or worse, had said something painfully true. Hetty didn't feel like joining the women's club out there. She was tired, for one. It had been a day of travel. But Hetty had never been comfortable surrounded by all those women, or women in general, the more she thought about it. She hadn't been raised with the secret language all women seemed to know, the whispers and the secrets and the gossip. She didn't want her personal life all over the front page any more than she wanted to read about someone else's. She did not know how to commiserate over her relationships with anyone. The only relationship she had had was with Morris. And when it fell apart, it was a problem all of her own. There was no need to consult an outside force. She'd called her parents the day after Morris confessed the affair, and all they said was, "Oh, a shame." Hetty and Morris were not rich, but the apartment they got back in Evanston was at least 3 times the size of Greta and Martha's, though this realization was bittersweet. When Hetty returned home at the end of the summer, if she returned home at the end of the summer, she would need to find an apartment of her own. The spare bedroom at her aunt's apartment was essentially a closet, half the room taken up by spare clothing in a musty pile atop a chair. She had initially wanted to rent a place in New York in lieu of bunking with the aunts, but her income had not been on her side. She had called Greta the evening after she and Morris both met with the lawyers for the first time. "Hello, Aunt Greta? Who is this?" "It's Hetty, out of Chicago," she said. Hetty tried to make her voice sound as small as possible. The aunts were always nicer to her when they remembered she'd once been a child. "It's been a while." "Hetty," Greta mused. Hetty imagined her coiling the cord around her ring finger, binding herself to the telephone. "I have a faint recollection, yes, of a girl who said she would never come home again." "I didn't say I wouldn't come home. I said I wouldn't come back to New York." "Well, what do you want? To come to New York?" They worked out a plan. Hetty would stay for 10 weeks while she was on break from school. In lieu of teaching, she would just save some money and spend time with her family in a way that marriage hadn't allowed her to before. That was the excuse, at least, that marriage had made her unavailable, that marriage had made her loathe New York. It was not a fundamental flaw of her personality. It was marriage. Regardless of the falseness, it all worked. Greta agreed. Hetty bought a plane ticket. Greta did not speak to her directly until long after her friends left. Hadn't they known Hetty was going to arrive that afternoon? She'd written to confirm plans, but the apartment was unsettled in her wake all the same. She felt like an intruder, an interloper. Wasn't family supposed to welcome you in, offer you a glass of water and an aspirin? Only when it was just her and Greta and Martha sitting in the kitchen, the 2 aunts each with a cup of decaf coffee, did Greta turn and speak to her. "You didn't bring the girl?" Hetty shook her head. "She's with Morris." Greta frowned but said nothing else. "She'll come later in the summer." "Not here?" Martha asked. No, we'll get a hotel room downtown." "I want to show her New York City," Hetty said. "Show her New York City?" Greta laughed. "This isn't New York City?" Hetty waved her hand. There existed the possibility her daughter would turn out all right after the divorce, but part of that all right involved never bringing her into Queens. That was where it all went wrong. Thank you. Thank you. Should I stay up here?
Yes.
Okay.
I'll have you come over here to share this mic in a second.
Okay.
This is a chance in Surel's Place style for us to ask questions of the artist about process, the thing typically, or the things we don't normally get to see or hear about. Also, for those of you online, if you'd like to chat your question in the chats. This is also me delaying a little bit because there is a delay, so we got to get their questions into real time here. So I will acknowledge some board members that we have online, Mari Christmas and Greg Mizuta, as well as our board members here in the room, Julie, who you met earlier, and we also have Diane Dorman over here, and our staff, Marnie Elmore on camera, and Greg Hahn is running sound and the switcher. So first, any questions here in the room? Yes, Elizabeth.
Okay. Hi, Fran.
Hi, Elizabeth.
I have a question. When you are trying to capture late 50s New York. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you do your research? How do you know? How do you approach that?
It's a great question. I'll stand up. It's a wonderful question. I read a mix of fiction and nonfiction, both from that period and set in that period and about that period. And maybe unlike a lot of writers drawing on history, it's probably 80% fiction, 20% nonfiction. I find just reading work from that era to be almost more informative around attitudes and figures of speech and realism more than outsider research from way later. The outsider research is great for, general arcs and trends of history, but I find for the nitty-gritty stuff, what people are eating, how people sound when they talk to each other, that fiction is often the greatest resource in that regard. And the other thing I try to keep in mind, I obviously don't want contemporary colloquialisms, but it's never so different as I think it is. It's really, I try to go a little easier on myself when it comes to, that's maybe not how they would sound exactly, because at the end of the day, it's also my vision of the past. So maybe they say things slightly off, and that's just the world that's being built. But yeah, a combination of in period fiction and then nonfiction. Mm-hmm.
By the way, I would consider it a great compliment if someone described me as being a soup of a man. Yeah, I like soup. It's a good time for soup. Yes.
Yeah, I thought that dialogue was great. And have you lived in New York? Have you spent some time there? I didn't hear the beginning of your presentation. I was also thinking about how is Idaho for you?
So how do you like Boise?
Oh my gosh, this is everyone's first question. I'll start with them first. I'm having a wonderful time in Boise. I've really enjoyed being here. I find the people so nice, so welcoming, so inviting, and a lot of residencies offer the opportunity to be in the middle of nowhere and speak to no one for anywhere from 1 week to 3 months. And my work is so character-centric and so people-centric that's kind of an impossible way for me to work. And so as far as doing creative work here, I find it to be wonderful because I still get to interact with people every day, but I get to do it far from home, which allows me to then, so leading into the next one, I'm in from New York. I'm currently living in New York, not in Queens, but in Brooklyn. And I think the distance has been great for the creative muscle of trying to recreate the feelings of those blocks, those streets, those trains, those areas, without just walking down my own street back in Brooklyn, texting on my phone, not paying attention to any of my neighbors. Being out here, I'm really forced to recreate some of this from memory, and those are a lot of the writing exercises I do. So a lot of how I write about New York is also just not being in New York. Whereas I think, Boy Teachers, which is set in the suburban Midwest, was a project I couldn't start until I no longer lived in the suburban Midwest. It had to be made clear to me through that distance. Mm-hmm.
And just to clarify, is what you read tonight, was all of that started here once you arrived? Okay, so, and how much more have you done that you didn't read?
I have about, I guess that's sort of a tough question. I probably have about another 15 pages of written fiction, but then I have pages and pages of notes and writing exercises that are, if not usable in just sort of the pages of what I'm writing, are all kind of serving as background of the project. Someone maybe at the first Friday was also like, how long do you think this project is going to take? And they told us in grad school to anticipate 5 years for every major project. And so my answer is 5 years from 3.5 weeks ago is when this will be done.
That's great. Any other questions in the room here? Yes, Sam.
I think you mentioned that the original inspiration was Greta, was the Aunt Greta. So how did you decide, will the novel stay in Hetty's, close POV, And how did you decide that she would be the protagonist and not instead of Greta?
See, it gives you time to think.
I have like two answers, and one is a non-answer. The first answer is when I'm doing first drafts, every decision is basically completely arbitrary, and the goal is words on a page. So this was the decision that just felt right when I sat down to work on it, and I'm not going to question it until I have one whole draft, and then I'm going to second guess every decision I've made. And one of the issues and discoveries I've made working on boy teachers is that the POV needed to shift around. And so often that's something I don't know until at least a broad map of the narrative is on the page. So it's the POV now that may change. The other answer to that is that I'm so close-minded and quite bad at writing out of the perspective of my own age. And so I'm often just drawn to the character who is closest in age to me. And so if I was going to tell a story about, a 30-year-old and two 45-year-olds, essentially, I'm going to nail down the 30-year-old as best as possible. But I think that's also work I have to do on my imagination and as a writer. So it may not be the way it is forever, but that's how and why I started it as such. These are all such good questions.
Yeah. One of my favorite books is Everything is Illuminated, which is basically an entirely invented family history. But I find that daunting, that idea of writing about an actual family member. Have you had to struggle? Like, what things did you have to get over in order to be like, I can just do writing exercises and brainstorms about this real person that is a member of my family, my ancestry?
I guess I have the added benefit of these are just people I basically never knew. My maternal grandmother passed away when I was very, very little. I have no recollection of her. So as far as I'm concerned, these people are strangers to me. And the hope is that I portray them respectfully and well-rounded. They may not all get along with each other, but I want them all to be of me in a sense, and people I would get along with depending on the context. And so the hope is to serve their memory correctly. And if they start haunting me, my dreams or otherwise, I'll maybe change gears, but that hasn't happened yet. I was like, if I start getting sort of bad vibes out in the world, I'll find something else to work on. The big concern is just more my immediate family, my parents, my brother, just to draw on family history, which, when it's made fiction, it's automatically distanced, but it's tough when things are rooted in truth. And it's hard when things are in first draft form too, because like I was saying, this could change. This is what it is now, but it might not be that way forever. And I get really precious around not sharing anything in the early stages, which I think is often bad for the work because then I'm not hearing feedback. And so the best I'm trying to do is be respectful to the legacy of everyone. And if my family, who I think is tuned in, wants to pick a bone with me after this, then I'm open to it and willing to hear it, because I think that's just part of the creative process in general. Like my first book was about arrogant young male teachers, and my brother for a period of time was a male teacher. I don't think he was arrogant, but it was very nerve-wracking to send that draft over to him and be like, here's what I think of people who are like you. Let me know what you think. But found him to be very receptive and open and willing to see both like the flaws and ego that is like the act of teaching in a lot of ways.
Are there living family members who knew Greta?
Not well. My mother met her as a kid, but I think by the time that falling out happened, she would have been single-digit years. So not great memory, but we have pictures of my mom with Greta. Mm-hmm.
So why would it be fiction instead of, say, creative non-fiction?
I think so I can be messier on the page than I ever could be in nonfiction. I think just to have that creative distance. And previously, the act of autofiction or even creative nonfiction was not really compelling to me until this story. But I also think fictionalizing it is perhaps the most respectful way of dealing around people I didn't know, is to take what I do know, but then also bring a lot of myself to it, because whether I'm aware of it or not, they are in me and the person I am. So I think just so I get to have a little more fun with it. Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, I'm not seeing any questions coming through online. Greg has mentioned that he wished he had some Basque Market croquetas with him right now, which is a reference to a current croquetas for a cause promotion where Surel's Place gets a cut of the money when people buy that specific croqueta from the Basque Market. That was a pretty buried, disguised plug for that. It happened so naturally. But there may be another question in the room, but I do want to also mention that I gave Fran kind of a different task than I've given any other resident who's been at Surel's Place in my tenure anyway. And that was, hey, you're going to be living with this art from the Bosco Small Works show. If you have any thoughts or inspiration from something you're seeing on the wall, would you just write it up and stick it on the wall under the painting? So you can see there's these paintings with blue tape under them, and these are comments that Fran has made as she has been in this room, working in this room and walking through the room. Are there one or two that we could highlight that you kind of like?
Yeah, definitely. The sort of the cityscape made of cards. I think it's the Five of Diamonds. I love that pencil drawing. I think it's so engaging. And I wrote this in my little description, but one of my closest friends recently became engaged to a longtime boyfriend who is a professional magician. And so I always think about their personal life where he's never not doing magic. My vision of them is her like reading the newspaper over breakfast and he's like pulling cards out of the air. And I mentioned this to her and she's like, okay, we don't subscribe to the newspaper, first of all. And like, that's never really how it works. I think he keeps his act to himself, but I can never really just let go. I can't believe the fortune of my friend to have a magical to-be spouse. So that really just reminded me of that. And then there's this beautiful painting of the sunset or the sky. I think the skies out here in Boise have been so beautiful, and I've gotten to see a lot of multicolor sunsets, which I was saying this earlier, you just don't really get sky like that in New York. You get like little slivers of sky, but I have a friend in New York who, and this is sort of a mutual relationship, but if it's a really good sunset in New York or there's some really kooky clouds, something like that, we just text each other sky, and it just means go to your nearest window and just go look at the sky, which can be a very easy thing to forget when you live there. And so this just reminded me like sky. And I've been sending a lot of sky texts from Boise to him, but it's not really the same for him back out east.
Thank you. We did get a request that you share something about your interaction with the Bora students. While Fran was here, she participated in our partner program where we send a resident into a school to interact with students, and Fran spent a day at Bora.
I loved the Bora students. They were so great. I used to teach college freshmen. These were high school juniors and seniors, so kind of around the same age. They were very polite and funny, and I got to do their podcast, and the senior who interviewed me, his name was Ruben, just came with this like beautiful typed list of questions that were so smart and incisive about, you know, being a woman in comedy and these like larger social issues. And I didn't know what to expect going into it. So I found it great. And then at the end of the day, I talked to the creative writing students, and we even got to do like really nitty gritty business kind of conversations, which I think when you start out in writing, a lot of that stuff is kept away from you because they're like, you should just go be inspired by the world. But like knowing some of the business and the rote aspects of it can be really valuable when you are just thinking about how to budget that time in your life. The craziest part of going in was that I spoke to like 4 different classes up at the top of the day, and I know this from having students, but you get students who are doodlers and who draw on the margins. These are students, you know, you just let them go, ignore them. But then one of the students drew me. and then gave me the drawing at the end. And she's like, I promise I was listening, but I did draw you. And it was very humbling and very strange. I've never had that happen before. I feel like she gave me like Pixar mom proportions, if that tracks, which is way more acceptable, I think, from a female student than otherwise. But I was very flattered to be represented in that way. I will frame it.
That's how Pixar movies start. Just little sketches on pieces of paper. All right, any final thoughts from the peanut gallery here? I think we've cleared our questions. I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. And of course, if you're not on our newsletter, just go to our website, surelsplace.org, and there's a big button right there that says something like join our newsletter or something, so you get updates on these events. And this video will be archived on our page as well. So thank you so much for sharing with us tonight.